Surprise!
Lucy, you sure this isn't suicide?
Come on, Jay. Mingtier Woods is perfect.
Wait, you're here too? Rose? Ooh, don't panic. Enough!
Hello there, Richard the Film Geek here, and I'm here to give you guys my surprise review of the 19-minute animated short film Moose on the Loose, which is written, directed, edited, voiced, and animated for the first time by my good friend Harry Thomas, aka Harry Thomas Pictures, which, by the way, surprise! Apparently took him just less than a year to animate, was uploaded onto his official YouTube channel on the 1st of October 2023, and is technically not just Harry's second short film overall after Your Imagination, which he made and uploaded on the 20th of October 2016, but also technically his second full attempt at animation after his claymation adaptation of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit. The brief story of Moose on the Loose, which I can almost perfectly describe as the Blair Witch Project meets Super 8 with a teensy tiny bit of Jurassic Park, is about an aspiring filmmaker named Lucy Hoos who heads to Mayntier Woods at nightfall with her boyfriend Jay Moss to shoot a movie for an upcoming film festival, only to then encounter a terrifying killer moose named Manrus who kills Jay and wreaks havoc during the film's production. And it's up to Lucy, her mother and their friends to avenge Jay's death by protecting the forest, discovering why Manrus is terrorizing everyone, and bring him down. So now that I've finally randomly decided to check out this short film as a surprise little favour for my good friend Harry Thomas, after needlessly boring myself silly, Harry. Here are my brief thoughts on Moose on the Loose. I have to be honest and frank with you, Harry. It was alright.
What?
Nah, of course I'm joking. To perfectly paraphrase Hagrid's quote from Prisoner of Azkaban, well done for your work here, Harry. Well done. I don't think it's perfect though, and of course there are a few certain obvious technical issues I have with the film that Ollie Pajak, aka Pajak's Perspective, Ross the movie reviewer, and one other critic have already pointed out, and that you may indeed need to constructively improve on for your next film. But otherwise, if this is your first daring attempt to demonstrate to us what you absolutely have the potential to be capable of as a future filmmaker or even animator, Harry, then wow, is this a good first attempt. What really impressed me about this film is how much of a real, genuine, sincere, beating heart it has, which sadly a large majority of animated feature films these days are sorely lacking. The first thing I really have to praise this film for is the animation style. Granted that this is basically the exact same drawing style that Harry usually implements within a large majority of his videos anyway, I'm actually pleasantly surprised and shocked by how immersed I was watching these drawings come to life before my eyes. So immersed, in fact, I almost completely forgot I was watching a bunch of obvious paper drawings on the screen. It's honestly very unique, very creative, very visually impressive to look at, especially during the action-packed climax towards the end. You can obviously tell Harry locked himself away for days and did all of these drawings by himself without ever losing concentration or train of thought, a work ethic for which I sincerely have to respectfully tip my hat off to him. And call me crazy for saying this, even though I'm dead serious. You're so damn talented at what you do, Harry, that Nick Park badly needs to hire you for a future animation job at Aardman. Which perfectly leads me to talking about the characters, especially that of our main protagonist, Lucy, who is very likeable, very relatable, and has a surprisingly touching and heartwarming relationship with her mother, which provides the overall emotional core of the film. The titular Moose on the Loose, Manrus, is such a surprisingly legit, scary, and terrifying antagonist. The best way I can describe this character is he is basically Bambi if he became a dangerously rogue and vengeful killer as a tragic result of his mother being killed, and basically shared the exact same justified motivation and burning hatred towards humankind as Shere Khan from the Jungle Book. Once you get to understand his motivation and why he's doing what he's doing, you do feel a semblance of pity for him on the one hand, but on the other hand, it doesn't really condone the horrific things he does in the film. As I stated earlier, despite the brief praise I'm giving this film, it's not perfect. The first issue I have with this film is the underdevelopment of some of the characters like Jay and a couple other side characters. I just didn't really find them quite as interesting as Lucy, her mother, and Manrus. And I really wish they could have been a bit more fleshed out and developed a bit better. So that's maybe one thing you definitely need to constructively consider improving on for your next film, Harry. The second issue is with the sound mixing and the score, which feels a bit off at times, is really damn difficult to properly listen to, and honestly sounds way too much like a television screen with the volume turned down. So maybe for next time, Harry, you need to come up with an actual score and or soundtrack which is much easier to listen to. The third issue I have with this film is frankly the noticeable lack of individual distinction when it comes to the voiceovers. Don't get me wrong though, huge kudos to Harry for taking it upon himself to voice all of these characters. And after all, there is precedent for such a brave undertaking like this. Maurice Denham voicing all the characters in the 1954 animated film adaptation of Animal Farm being the most famous example. But I'm not going to lie, it just becomes distracting and thus really hard to tell who is who because they sound exactly the same without any subtle difference or change in the voice or even a different accent for each of the characters, if you know what I mean. Plus, it doesn't exactly help that nearly each of the voices sound robotic, almost like they're Daleks or Cybermen, or even some of the Trade Federation battle droids from the Phantom Menace. Not necessarily the fault of the voice acting itself though, but rather more to do with the editing, which I am going to touch on in a moment. So, with that said, and with all due respect, Harry, I have to agree with and reiterate the point Ollie brought up in his review of this short, that for your next film, you may need to consider the idea of hiring a more individually talented ensemble voice cast. I mean, heck, Ollie is a professional actor himself, as well as a filmmaker, and he has maybe like a few dozen other fellow actors working alongside him collaboratively on his projects anyway. So why the hell not hire these guys to help you and or star in your next film? Heck, even I'm clearly having fun making voiceover videos on my own channel at the moment, so why the hell not even hire me to do some future voice work? If so, I'd obviously be very happy to help. And whatever script you email me with or whatever, and whatever role you want me to play, I'd absolutely be down for it 100% and happy to do the very best I can with any material I'm given. And of course the fourth and final issue I have with this film is with the editing, which sadly lets the film down a bit for me. Not that it necessarily horribly damages the viewing experience for me personally in any way, but it's just very jumpy, slightly awkward, constantly stop-starting, literally throughout the entire film, and it feels like it's edited in a way that I would imagine AI editing an animated feature film today. Don't get me wrong, Harry. In a way, I understand and sympathise with the fact that admittedly you're not the greatest when it comes to editing your videos. But regardless, again, with all due respect, you know I know this is the one area you badly need to consider improving on the most for your next film. Maybe with the use of another video editing app like iMovie or some professional editing software, or heck, even ask me and or Ollie to help edit your next film for you. It's not even really that difficult to ask, if you don't mind me politely saying, Harry. In conclusion, despite the few obvious shortcomings I've pointed out, especially on the technical side, I had more of a surprisingly good time checking out Moose on the Loose than I expected I would. It has huge heart, good drama, good action, a relatable protagonist, as well as a scary antagonist, and especially unique animation that only has the potential to get even better from here. In case you want to check this film out for yourself, I will very kindly leave a link to the film in the description. And with all that being said, you should be mighty impressed with what you've achieved here, Harry. There is always room for improvement, and of course very much looking forward to see what you do next. Have a little glass of apple juice on me, and my overall rating for Moose on the Loose is going to be a strong 7.5 out of 10. I thought I might as well strike it while the iron's hot and get things out of the way by giving you guys my brief review of one of his very first projects, namely his Aardman-style claymation adaptation of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit, which was split into 14 1 to 6 minute parts and was uploaded onto his official YouTube channel from the 23rd of July 2015 to the 17th of April 2020. Pretty much everyone knows the basic story of The Hobbit, especially if they happened to have read the book or even seen some of the feature film adaptations, most notably the Rankin Bass hand-drawn animated version from 1977, as well as the needlessly bloated live-action Peter Jackson trilogy from 2012 to 14. But both for the sake of uniformity and for the sake of informing those who are still somehow unfamiliar anyway, the story of The Hobbit takes place 60 years before the events of The Lord of the Rings during the Third Age of Middle-earth, and we follow a much younger Bilbo Baggins, who is in his 50s and thus roughly the same age as his future nephew Frodo, at at least according to the official franchise lore, as he is tasked by the wizard Gandalf and a small company of dwarves led by Thorin Oakenshield to accompany them on an epic quest to reclaim the lost dwarf kingdom of Erebor, as well as recover their stolen treasure within the Lonely Mountain from the terrifying clutches of Smaug the Dragon, all whilst encountering a bumbling trio of mountain trolls, stone giants, elves, goblins, spiders, a game of riddles with the infamous creature Gollum, and a certain one ring of power along the way. So now that I've finally checked out for the first time Harry Thomas's 14-part, at least maybe perhaps so far, claymation adaptation of The Hobbit, here are my brief thoughts on it. Well, very similarly to my thoughts on Moose on the Loose, I wouldn't quite say this was perfect, especially on the technical side of things. However, since this has somewhat of a distinction of being Harry's very first project, one of which he was helped, by the way, by his sister Lucy, which was honestly an awesome fact for me to find out, and thus the one that got his channel very deservedly noticed here on YouTube in the first place, and also especially coming from someone who really likes the Hobbit trilogy, especially the Desolation of Smaug, and absolutely holds Lord of the Rings in very high regard as my personal favourite movie trilogy of all time. I thought this was a pretty good effort from you, Harry. Just well done. This is another project you should be immensely impressed with. Very much like with Moose on the Loose, the first thing for which I have to praise this film is the claymation, which is very uniquely and impressively well detailed. You can absolutely tell how much Harry loves the Hobbit trilogy and really worked his hardest to recapture all three of these movies in animation, especially when it comes to the hand-drawn backgrounds of some of the iconic locations from the book and or the films, i.e. Bag End, Rivendell, the Misty Mountains, Mirkwood, and especially the Lonely Mountain, as well as of course the character designs, which are surprisingly eerily similar to how they look in the films, especially given that it would of course have been insanely laborious for Harry to recapture every single scene from the films. I'm also quite impressed by how well he managed to pace this story much closer to the book, even despite the obvious aesthetic similarities to the movies, minus the extra baggage, which in one's honest and frank opinion felt needlessly shoehorned into the movies anyway, and frankly didn't really do anything to advance or even serve the story, other than to both drag out the runtime to 3 hours each, and to further stress and double down on the connective tissue to Lord of the Rings. In fact, very much like the book, the whole sequence with Gollum was the only necessary piece of connective tissue to the Lord of the Rings things that we legitimately needed. Because not only does it perfectly cement Gollum as one of the most iconic literary characters of all time, as well as cements his particular burning hatred towards his own former kind, perfectly introduces him as this horrible looking and manipulative, yet adorably wretched, pitiful and complex creature who ultimately gets to play a very important part in the Lord of the Rings story, for good or ill, but also above all perfectly explains how the ring comes into Bilbo's possession and how Bilbo ultimately spared Gollum's life when he otherwise had the chance to kill him. Even though I have to reiterate once again that Harry should really consider the idea of hiring a more individually talented ensemble cast for next time, another thing I have to give huge kudos to him for is the surprisingly spot-on impressions he does here of each of the characters. I really love his Gollum impression, as well as his Gandalf, Thorin, and Smaug impressions, but my absolute favourite and the absolute best has to be his Bilbo impression. It sounded so nearly exactly like Martin Freeman that I almost thought Harry actually somehow cast the guy himself in this film. However, this is where the brief praise ends and the constructive critique comes in. The first issue I have with this film is, despite it being really awesome, obviously, to hear Howard Shore's score being used in this film, as well as a neat little musical homage to the Rankin Bass version, it really needed to be dialed up a bit for me to hear a bit more clearly. Don't get me wrong, Harry, I'd perfectly understand that you maybe didn't want to risk doing such a thing in case you got one of YouTube's notorious copyright claims or even a strike on your channel. But if you really wanted to avoid this problem, my constructive advice to you would be for you to come up with your own Howard Shore-esque score for this, and or throw in a bit of John Williams or Hans Zimmer or Jerry Goldsmith into the mix to make your score, stand out a bit more and sound a little bit more original, if you really know what I mean. The second, more obvious issue I have with this film is with the editing. While it thankfully isn't quite as stop-starty as Moose on the Loose was, it's still very noticeably jumpy, and it felt at times like I was watching a classic Looney Tunes cartoon. Nothing at all wrong with that per se, but it does actually feel like you're almost whizzing through the story, and it's kind of distracting that way. Plus maybe a couple out-of-focus shots could have been slightly shaved off as well. And the third and final issue I have with this film is the surprising lack of a proper conclusion to the story. I mean, granted, I guess you can make the argument that Smaug's final defeat does serve somewhat of an apt ending, but for me it just feels rather abrupt, and I kind of get the sense that there is no proper resolution for any of the other characters, and particularly the character journeys of Thorin and Bilbo. And Harry, you know I know that it's kind of obvious that so far you clearly haven't finished this story yet, and you could maybe at least consider the idea of tying things up a bit by making 2 or 3 more parts. In conclusion, again, despite the few technical shortcomings I just pointed out, I actually kind of enjoyed this little take on The Hobbit. Its heart is absolutely very much in the right place, and it surprisingly does a pretty good job of recapturing what we like and or love about the films in a way that even Peter Jackson himself would be pretty much impressed with. If you want to check all 14 parts, at least so far, of this film out for yourself, I will very kindly leave a link to the full official playlist in the description. And with all that being said, have a full Hobbit's second breakfast on me, Harry. And my overall rating for The Hobbit Claymation is actually going to be slightly higher than what I previously gave Moose on the Loose, which is a strong 8 out of 10.
Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old.
Don't forget to do the following few things as always. Leave a comment below, let me know your thoughts, subscribe to my channel as well as Harry Thomas Pictures official channel. Click on the little bell to receive any emailed notifications and or updates from my channel. If you haven't already, you can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Letterboxd and Blue Sky. Do take care everyone, and to politely borrow Harry's quote from the end of his videos, movies are us.